Tattoo artists of Reddit. What was your worst mistake and how did the client react? Story 1. I was a receptionist at a tattoo shop. One of the artists misspelled neighborhood on this guy's neck. He spelled it neighborhood, leaving out the first H. Neighborhood was the guy's nickname. It was a pretty large, elaborate tattoo, so there was no fixing it. I don't think I've ever cringed so hard in my life. The guy was surprisingly really cool about it. He did see the drawing and approved it before it was tattooed on. He ended up making the artist tattoo an H on his palm, so if anyone gave him crap about it, he could smack that person with the missing H. We now have a Discord. Check out the server in the link in the description. Story 2. I had a client email me asking for a 4-letter acronym. I don't do freehand script, so I put the letters into a font generator and sent him back some options. He picked the one he liked best and we set an appointment date. On the day of his session, I showed him the acronym again and we chose a size. I placed the stencil and he approved it and I got started. Midway through the tattoo, I asked him what the letters stood for and he told me. My heart stopped. The letters were in the wrong order. The middle two were swapped. I ran to the shop computer to check my email and sure enough, in his original email he'd sent me, they were correct. I had typed them into the font generator wrong, but to be fair, he had seen them several times since then and didn't notice my mistake. I spent the rest of the session covering them up with another design he'd had as a backup tattoo idea and I didn't charge him. But it was a good learning experience for me to always ask what initials or acronyms stand for ahead of time, just to make sure I get them in the right order. Story 3. My wife and I got matching tattoos with our children's birthday and our wedding day. Pretty generic. We had to watch the kids, so we took turns. She went first. I showed up after her appointment and she was beaming with excitement at how nice the numbers were. She showed me, and the wedding day was wrong. She had the 15th and ours is the 14th. The tattoo artist felt terrible. My wife had looked at it at least twice before it was put on. Entirely her fault. Story 4. Just posted this in the other thread, but here it is again. I misspelled forward. It was a line of script on the side of a foot, and a last-minute addition to a couple other tattoos they were getting. I quickly knocked it together on Photoshop and nothing looked out of place. The client approved, so I made the stencil. The real screw-up is that I didn't ask them to spell check. I always ask them to spell check, except for this one time. The next day, they came back and pointed out that forward isn't spelt forward, like F-O-R-E. I do a lot of reading, and I guess it didn't look wrong because I'm used to seeing it as the forward of a book. I apologized profusely, feeling like a total idiot, and told them to pick at the scab of the extra E and the W while they were healing and come back in 2 weeks. Fixing the O was easy, and I was able to turn the E and W into a wide loopy W and add extra bits of loops and flourish to other letters so it looked totally in place, albeit a bit stylized. She was happy in the end and still comes to get work from me. 10 years of tattooing and that one still haunts me. There have been other mistakes, but they're mostly the client's fault. Things like dads getting their children's birthdays wrong happens a lot actually. Dude, I don't know what month your kid was born. Call your wife. Also, bonus story, the guy who spells his kid's name wrong. I had him write their name down, and literally, he wrote it down, Bentley. I drew up a fun custom script, he loved it. Put the stencil on him and had him check it out. I even told him to make sure everything was right. All good. Did the lining and had him check it out while we took a break. He loved it. Finished the shading and drop shadow, etc. All finished. He's checking it out in the mirror. Loves it. Until I hear, what about the E? What E? I reply in dismay. The E. Bentley has an E. So I show him what he had written down and he groans. Oh man, I always screw that up. My wife is going to kill me. So I sit down with the original drawing and manage to turn part of the L and the Y into an E. Add another couple of lines to reform the L and Y and boom, Bentley. It worked out in the end and I felt like an absolute wizard, but come on dude, it's your kid's name. And you didn't notice the spelling was wrong 10 times? What a job. Yeah, that last one, tattoo artist had nothing to do with it, because Bentley can be spelled without an E just as easily. I am always amazed when things like the first story here happen though, like forward, because you work on it for a long time, don't you? Tattoos don't just appear. I'm surprised at no point it clicked in for OP. Story 5. Worked as a piercer in a shop a decade ago. A guy came in and wanted Murphy's Law. The artist freehanded a design on him, he greenlit it after watching it in the mirror, and they did a beautiful piece with a banner saying, Murphy's Law. Seemed fitting. The guy loved the fact that his one messed up tattoo was the Murphy's Law one. Story 6. I had some really crappy experiences in this shop, but this one was up there. Apologies for the very long story. This was during my apprenticeship. I'd been tattooing on human skin for no more than 2 weeks and was very inexperienced. My mentor wanted me to participate in a $13 Friday the 13th flash special coming up that week. I drew a flash sheet full of designs that I was confident I could pull off with my limited experience. I spent the entire day beforehand prepping my station, gathering supplies, printing stencils and consent forms, cleaning the entire shop, etc. I decided to sleep on the shop floor that night so in the morning I could buy the whole shop some fancy donuts from a nearby cafe and get back in time for the event. Right before it started, my mentor, who was also the shop owner, changed up the rules of the special. He announced on Instagram that people could bring in whatever small design they wanted to get done for $13. I was suddenly being asked to draw and tattoo designs that I was fully unprepared to take on. The shop had one computer with Photoshop that we all had to take turns on to create designs, so our turnaround time slowed to a crawl. And I already tattooed slow anyway since I was so green. The shop was overflowing with people and we had a wait list with literally over 100 names. Over the course of the day, I only managed to tattoo 6 or 7 people. I ended up working for 14 hours straight. Didn't even have time to eat any of the donuts. Just as we were about to close up shop at 2 a.m., one girl walks in and asks if she can still get in on the special. She asks for a butterfly. My mentor tells me to take care of it. I'm exhausted, but hey, you don't tell your mentor no. So I print the stencil and get started. And, well, my hands just stop functioning. My wrists were so sore and cramped from working all day that I couldn't control the tattoo machine anymore. It was the strangest, most horrible feeling. I watched in horror as, no matter how hard I tried to tame my gnarled hands, I just completely botched this girl's tattoo. Lines were all squiggly and off. I even cut into her arm in some places. Lots of bleeding. I felt absolutely horrible. It looked horrendous. I called another artist over to finish the tattoo for me and told the client that her tattoo was on the house. She left without saying much. We closed up shop after she left and I told the other artists to go on home while I stayed behind and cleaned up. I cried as I cleaned. I only made enough money that day to cover the price of the stupid donuts. By the time I was done cleaning at like 3:30 a.m., I still had to ride my bike a few miles home. I was so tired that I decided to spend a second night sleeping on the shop floor. I woke up early the next morning to ride home, and the rear wheel had been stolen off my bike. I had to carry it 2 miles to the nearest bike shop and spend $90 on a new wheel, tire, and cassette. I thought that was the end of it. That was the end of the nightmare. A week later, I'm at home and get a call from my mentor. He's screaming through the phone. Apparently, the butterfly girl went and left a 1-star review of the shop on Google after her experience with me. He said I disgraced the name of the shop and the other artists that worked there. I had to come in the next day and apologize to each of them personally for damaging their reputations. I then had to contact the client and apologize once again to her and offer her another free tattoo. She never responded. The whole experience was humiliating. I've been told by other tattoo artists since that my mentor is mostly the one to blame for this whole situation and that I'd been set up to fail. But I still feel so awful about what I did to that poor girl's arm. I should have known I was just too exhausted to keep working. I should have just called that other artist over much sooner to fix my work before I made it worse. I should have done a lot of things differently, but at least I learned from it, I guess. Ugh. Anyway, I hate tattooing butterflies now. Kinda sounds like my man had repetitive stress injury from working all day. That feeling of your hand just not being able to do what it needs to do and it's just the weirdest feeling, I get that. I think I've had that a couple times. Really though, yeah, it's not OP's fault at all. His mentor set him up to fail hard. Bad choice by the mentor. Story 7. A few years ago, I was tattooing a client who had apparently lost a bet. His buddies were allowed to tattoo something behind his shoulder as long as it wasn't racist or offensive. Turns out the guy drew up a design of a leprechaun throwing up on a book. Sure, why not? Everyone was sober and they were paying pounds up front. Easy work. The drawing was really simple and shading was easier than I thought it would be. Turns out everyone liked it. Except for the guy with the tattoo of a leprechaun throwing up on a book. He picked at the scab trying to get rid of it, completely took it from bad to worse. Guy comes in about 10 days later demanding a refund of the money he didn't even pay, or the studio, not me, to cover it up. Nope, management said you signed for it, you were in your right mind, and then you damaged it yourself. Personally though, I was yelled at and told to never tattoo anyone like that. It only works in television series or film. Did I make a mistake? Yes and no. The lesson here is don't get involved in others' drama when permanent body markings are involved. Story 8. Did my first one on an old schoolmate who was aware of my artistic abilities, despite having never applied ink before, and he offered me his back. I had 3 pros watching as I drew a geisha freehand on his back while he was hunched over. When the design was laid out, he checked it in the mirror and was good with it, so I began lining it. The thing is, the other artists said it looked great. but unfortunately I was doing something else when he checked it, so I didn't notice just how screwed up it really was. Anyway, I lined it and we took a break. As he stood up while I was watching, my heart dropped, as I witnessed the geisha's face droop into a palsied state on one side. He was sitting leaned forward with his elbows on his knees while drawing it, and so it distorted the canvas. Now, this sounds crappy, but I never really liked the guy that much anyway. He originally wanted a back full of strippers, so I didn't feel that bad when he went to look in the mirror. He lifted his shoulder to look at the tattoo, which normalized the proportions, and he said it looked awesome. Well, good then. Big lesson learned, though. I still have the occasional nightmare over it. So, OP had 3 professionals watching and none of them pointed out the fact that this guy's skin was stretched or whatever or bunched up? That seems weird. I feel like one of them should have caught it. Story 9. I was doing a big old tattoo of Battle Cat on a really cool client's leg. I got so into doing this big awesome tiger head that I forgot it wasn't a goddamn tiger and colored the stripes black. I realized about a third of the way through filling them in and let the guy know. He was disappointed but mostly okay with it. I felt like I was going to puke. I finished the thing feeling so freaking sick and then refused payment. Man, going from that feeling of elation to immediate crushing disappointment was hard to shake, and kind of dazed me. It was extra crushing because it was a fun tattoo during a time when I wasn't that busy and was mostly absolutely dreck. The payment was just the icing on top, so letting that go was hard too. Ugh, just thinking about it now is making me feel sick. Story 10. My only spelling mistake ever was in Italian. Girl wants a phrase in Italian. She writes it down no less than 5 times on a piece of paper. I tell her to make sure it's correct. I don't speak Italian. She insists it is correct. I draw up some nice script, tattoo it on with no issues, bandage, pay, and she leaves. She comes back in hysterics and tells me I spelled it wrong. I had not thrown out the paper yet. I spelled it exactly how she spelled it. I asked her what she wanted to do, and she decided, no one I know speaks Italian. That was about 15 years ago. I often wonder if she ended up getting it covered up. Story 11. I gave a guy a tattoo in prison of his girlfriend's name on his arm. I knew him on the street and his girl, and knew it was going nowhere, and insisted he change his mind. He didn't, so I made a bet with him that crap was going to go belly up within 6 months. When we got out of segregation and back onto the yard, a few weeks passed at most, and I can see him having a bad conversation on the phone. He called me over to his cell and offered me up a huge freaking sack of commissary without a word. I didn't take it. Figured he needed it more than me. Still feel like crap to this day. Story 12. I had a client who decided he wanted lettering on his forearms, sayings in Greek and Hebrew. He doesn't speak either language, but he had one of his friends double-check the spelling before he sent the references to me. Came in, we did the tattoos, pretty simple appointment. Fast forward to a couple weeks later, I get a message from my client about the tattoo that was done in Hebrew. He owns a small construction/restoration company, and had a few Israeli guys who work for him. Apparently, they were giving him a lot of crap for his Hebrew tattoo. He originally thought they were just messing with him, because it was spelled wrong. The font he had chosen off a quick Google search essentially changed a couple of the letters, kind of like the difference between an F and a T, making it a completely different word. We ended up being able to fix it pretty easily and had a good laugh about it. But definitely beware when you're getting tattoos in a language you and your artist don't speak. Or perhaps maybe don't get tattoos in a language you don't speak at all? Don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say it's offensive or anything. Just like, it seems really risky for something that's going to be on your body forever. That's all. Story 13. Apprentice here. Nothing major, but bad karma on one tattoo from the get-go that absolutely floored my confidence for a bit. Only recently did my first ever small tattoo on a client. Had to do a small range of flash ideas that I felt comfortable with. Had my mentor, who, judging by some other stories I'm very lucky to have, he's a sound dude, discuss with me before for my needle choices, placement technique, usual bits, and was ready to go. Everything felt ready. Midway through, my machine goes. It's brand new, my only one. Managed to sort it out without much fuss. In doing so, in my panic, I put the wrong needle size in the machine when it came to replacing it with a fresh one. Botched a line when I realized almost immediately the size difference. Change again, nerves are shot, back at it. Brand new foot pedal breaks. Replace it with an old one from my mentor. It breaks. 2. Power pack dies. That was brand new too. Panic. Spill my ink. Practically had a meltdown in my brain about what has happened. Carried on with another artist's equipment. Apologizing as calmly as I can to my client. Mentor calmed my nerves and I ended up pulling it out of the bag. And doing a job I was happy with somehow. But most importantly, the client loved it. Anyway, not a crazy bad story, but as an apprentice who's also a fairly confident dude, I have never felt so absolutely floored in my life. Tattooing someone is monumentally stressful when all doesn't go to plan. I can't wait to do more and progress. But screw me, what a time for crap to happen. My mentor helped me sort all my gear afterward and was super cool. Sat with me and said something like, "Well, of all the times and all the things that could have gone wrong, that was the absolute perfect one of them." Nerve-wracking stuff. Story 14. When I started tattooing, I was working at an awful studio that would often give me works that didn't fit my style in any way, like very fine line works which I wasn't good at all. The mistakes I made were usually crooked tattoos or going too deep, and instead of actually helping me, the owners would either yell at me later, forced me to tell the clients I was more experienced than I actually am, and got upset that I asked too many questions. Eventually, they just stopped giving me work altogether. Sadly, every once in a while, they give my number to unhappy clients that I tattooed at the time, and I still get calls asking me for compensation. I know it's also my fault for those things, but they really refuse to take any responsibility. These days, I have my own small one-person studio. I have nothing but sweet and satisfied clients, and ironically, I do a lot of fine line tattoos now, which I used to really hate at that other studio. But if you want a specific story, here you go. While I was in the studio, some girl wanted a cursive tattoo that was extremely tiny. It was super small and thin, and when I finished it looked good, but when it healed, a lot of the letters spread and mashed up together, and because she barely had any tattoos, it was very noticeable. I gave her money back even though she demanded me to pay for tattoo removal. And yes, she signed a contract beforehand, but the studio told me it protected only them and not me. I read thoroughly and fortunately realized she had no case against me, so she couldn't sue. In general, today, I recommend people to steer clear of that place. Disgusting money grabber jerks. Story 15. When I was but a wee baby piercer, I worked at the biggest shop in my city which had 14 artists and 2 piercers. It was the peak of the tramp stamp trend. I'm still so sad that was the nickname. Butt antlers was so much better. So when a super tiny 18-year-old black woman came in and wanted her name on her lower back with a flower, it was just normal. An older white male tattoo artist took her to pick a font. It took a minute, even though back then everyone went with Edwardian, but they came out. I had her do the paperwork and he got the drawing finished. She okayed the design, she okayed the stencil, she sat for the tattoo, loved it, tipped him, and left. 2 hours later, she called back sobbing, saying we ruined her life. The counter girl told her to come in and we would fix whatever was wrong. Tattoo girl comes back with her 2 gigantic, angry AF friends who are ready to freak out. We finally see the tattoo. Her name was Whitney, but the N got left out in the font process. So huge across her lower back, it said Whitey. It was covered for free and with many apologies with 3 giant purple roses. The tattoo artist was so screwed up over it that he didn't come in for a week. It was an honest mistake, but it was also the worst freaking spelling error I've ever seen.